and welcome to this ISM Trust webinar on tips and tricks for arranging and composing in Dorico 5. I'm Ruth McPherson, Head of Charity Development at the ISM. And to describe myself, I'm a white woman with long brown hair and I'm wearing a green t-shirt and the ISM Trust logo is behind me. I always get the side wrong. And I'm delighted to be joined on this webinar by Steinberg's International Product Specialist for Dorico, John Barron. John is a saxophone and keyboard player, and prior to joining Steinberg, he spent many years working for Sibelius, and it's that same team who have been developing the brand new Dorico program. Online or in person, John now runs Dorico training sessions to help people save time in the composition process and music preparation. Before we begin the webinar, just a few things to note. Please do introduce yourselves to your fellow attendees in the chat box. Let us know your role in music and where you're joining us from today. And during the presentation, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer these at the end. And do keep an eye on the chat box where we'll be dropping in some useful links as we go. And if you experience any technical difficulties, let us know in the chat box and we'll attempt to resolve them. And if you wish to use them, subtitles are available to enable at the bottom of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and we'll share the recording with you afterwards, as well as a feedback survey, which we'd be very grateful if you would fill out. The ISM Trust is the ISM's sister charity, which offers high quality professional development to everyone working in music. Through the ISM Trust, the ISM gives back to the music sector and supports and empowers music professionals to succeed. We produce award-winning events, resources and training, which are largely completely free to access. Please do consider supporting the work of the ISM Trust by becoming a friend of the Trust, making a donation, or leaving a legacy in your will. Any support that you can offer is really appreciated and goes towards empowering and supporting the next generation of music professionals. Now, I'm very pleased to hand over to John, who is going to explain how Dorico can help you to speed up your arranging process for any type of ensemble, as well as offering some clever composition ideas. So thank you, and over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Ruth. So welcome, and yes, thank you all for joining. I'm just looking in the participants list at the moment. I can see a couple of people who I know, so welcome whether I know you or not. To describe myself, as Ruth did, for partially sighted, I'm a white man with short brown hair, blue shirt, matches my eyes I guess, and a grey jumper. I'll mostly today be sharing my screen, so you'll be able to see Dorico on my screen, and then I can show you through various features and options and things in Dorico today as we go, so I'll do that now. Let's make sure that bit works. And there we go. As we said, we'll be monitoring questions. We'll probably take most of those at the end. I may keep a bit of an eye on those if I can, so if there's relevant things at the time, but otherwise we'll take most of the key questions at the end. And there is, as we said, there's the Q&A panel as well. So if there's anything that you would really like us to cover today, just to make sure that we do, then pop them in there. I'll also make sure you get my contact details and various other resources and things. So if you do have questions afterwards, if you suddenly think, oh, there's a thing I meant to ask, then you should be able to also do that, even if it's after the session. So hopefully you can all see my screen. I'll presume you can, unless I'm told otherwise by one of the moderators, and I'm just going to press play so we can make sure we can hear something as well. So hopefully you are also able to hear some of Dorico there. There's various playback options. We're going to look at all sorts of things today. So it's a relatively short session, but we'll try and cover as much as possible. So things about importing music, or how to input music, and how to play the music, and how to export the music, because obviously you want to write music for real players. We won't touch too much today on video options, but as you can see, this particular file has a video in there as well. So if you want to write music to picture, to video, anything like that, then you can also do those kind of things in Dorico as well. While I've got this project open, actually, and I'll just take the video off so we can see what's going on. One of the neat things, especially maybe at the end of a project when you need to produce a short score, is if you've got this kind of problem where you've got lots and lots of instruments. So, for example, multiple clarinets here, 12 French horns, 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, a couple of bass trombones. That should keep. I think that should probably keep Dave happy, Dave Minchin. Then, and all these other instruments. The problem is that to get them all on one page can be a bit tricky. So you could either have a very large paper and very small staves, or you can do an option called condensing. So, for example, here at the top of the score here, we've got a couple of flutes and the tin whistles and oboes and clarinets. If we just go to the edit menu and condensing, then we can turn an option on for Dorico to condense them. So it's making a lesser number of staves and automatically condensing the music down to those. You can also do this in its own layout. So here's a different version of the score. I can have different size paper now, and I can have smaller paper or larger staves as I need them. Everything still fits, but it's then you can see effectively using voices to display these 2 flutes automatically, and down here we have 3 clarinets, and it's displaying them all with a single stem. So this condensing option in Dorico is a really useful way of making yourself a short score at the end of the project. So you've got something that you or the conductor can conduct from without having to make everything really tiny to fit. And it's literally an on and off option. Now, one of the things really that I would like you to take away from today is that shortcuts are going to be a real time saver for you for things. I'm not expecting you to learn them all at the beginning, but for example, I've set a shortcut for condensing, so I can press a shortcut and it turns the condensing off, and I press a shortcut and it turns the condensing back on again, and so I don't have to always go up to the menu to find something. I'm going to tell you a number of things today about how you can use shortcuts, how you can set shortcuts and that kind of thing. Just before we move on, also down here at the bottom here, there's various things happening with the strings, including some divisi sections. So this is what we call page view, so you're looking at a page of music, but if you switch this to galley view, which you can do with this button down at the bottom down here, or you can also do it with a shortcut, then you can see here whether we have the strings coming in and out here. There's various divisi sections, and you can label these. So we have a little divisi label option here. And this just means that when you need a divisi section, you can set a divisi point. You can decide what you want the division to be. So is it 2 sections? Is it a solo and gli altri for everybody else? Or whatever's happening, whatever's going on there, you can set them. And Dorico will then add the staves where it needs them. You can then set a unison point later on if they all need to go back to unison. And it's all done automatically then for the layout on the pages. So this is our galley view. It's just one long continuous stream of music. But when we instantly go back into page view, then Dorico will automatically work out where the divisi points need to be and what the labeling should be and everything else. So it's a really, quick, easy way of making sure you've got the right sections at the right time without having to decide exactly where the sections and things appear on the page. If you want a little bit more information about divisi, then you can either ask me, we can talk about it in another session, or you can actually just Google lots of our information as well. So if you Google Dorico and divisi, then that will come up as well. So I mentioned those, lots of things you can do with shortcuts. Now, if you are using any of the menus in Dorico, you'll see that there's lots of shortcuts listed down the right hand side here of this menu. So it says Shift B, Shift Q, Shift C. There's also a few other places that you can learn a few of these. So on our resources page, and I'm just going to put this in the chat. So this is the resources link. So this is a Dorico resources page where you can get lots of useful information. If you've not used Dorico before, there are video playlists to teach you how to install things, how to start projects. There's a getting started guide. Now, this one's just a simple 4-page option that will give you a a very quick intro into Dorico, so entering some notes, creating some instruments, all that kind of thing. But it's a very useful little PDF. There's also a much longer first steps guide if you want it. So if you want a comprehensive kind of follow along exactly how to use it, how to use all the shortcuts and that kind of thing, you can download that one from here. There's also a video version of it, so if you prefer a video version, then you can do that one as well. There's also things like these quick reference cards. So the quick reference card looks like this one. It's designed to stand on your desk and have shortcuts on it so that you can then see, what's going on. You can print it if you want to. So here is a version that you can print, so you can then stand it on your desk. If you find us at any of the in-person events, then I also have lots of these that you can take away. If you see me in person somewhere, track me down, then you can take one of these. And we also, because lots of the shortcuts are listed on here, but we wanted to put them together in a slightly different version. If you also find us in person, you can get one of these mouse mats, or you can print this if you want to. And both of these options are also available as posters that you can download from the resources page. So if you want to put them on a school classroom wall, that kind of thing, you can use them. But the idea of this mouse mat is that when you reach for your mouse to look for what the to action any of these things, to click on any of these buttons, it reminds you what the shortcut is for any of these. So all of these are shift something down here. All of these have options down here. Your articulations are listed and various other things that you can do in the middle of the screen here, moving notes and using the system track and adding slurs and all those kind of things. Also, the note durations are listed across the top here as a reminder. So there's various options. So our resources page, and there's all sorts of other useful things on here as well. You can find our forum. So if you want to go and chat to other people, there's a Facebook group, and there's some in various different languages as well. If you want to ask questions on there, and we answer those questions, the team answer those questions as well. There's various other third-party resources. So if you want to get really into shortcuts, you can use things like a Stream Deck for shortcuts, or I did a session last week on scripting and various other things. So there's some of it's a bit nerdy, but if you proper power user wants to get into those kind of things, we have those kind of things for you as well. But really, don't worry, you don't need those to actually get into using Dorico. There are trainers available. You can also book some time with me if you want as a switch session. We can talk more about playback at some point if we need to, only a little bit today, and also different types of fonts you can use. So the resources page really is a useful kind of single place to go to for all sorts of things, whether you're just starting out Dorico or you want to, you've been using it a little while. Now, when you do want to do things like shortcuts, you'll see that some of the ones I use, for example, is condensing one. They don't actually exist by default. So if you need to create shortcuts, then on a Mac, you can go to Dorico Preferences. If you're on Windows, you go to the Edit menu in Preferences. And in here, there's a key commands section. Key commands are what Steinberg, Steinberg are the people who make Dorico, it's what they call shortcuts. So key commands, shortcuts, it's exactly the same thing. You can search up here, for example, for condensing, and then you can find where condensing exists. So it exists as a filter and a view option, and in the edit menu. So for condensing itself, I've set a shortcut. You just click in this box here, press the shortcut key you want to use, or combination of keys in my case, set a shortcut. You can also have a MIDI learn option. If you have a button on your keyboard that you want to be an action, a shortcut for something, you can do it. So I know people who've set the lowest note on their 88 key keyboard, for example, to be undo. So when they're doing something on their keyboard and they make a mistake, they just hit the very lowest key in frustration, and that's their undo button. So you can do that kind of thing as well. There's also the jump bar, and so we'll look at the jump bar in a little bit, but just understand this is also where you can set jump bar aliases. So if I start a new project, I'm going to close this one for a second, and we'll start a new project and look at how we might use some of those things and some of those shortcuts. So I'll do create new. So this is where you can create all of your new projects from. I'm just going to say empty to start off with, so there's no instruments. Right from the beginning is where we'll start. So on the right hand side, I could add a title if I wanted to. So let's say this is my ISM project, and the composer can be me today. You can set a paper size. If you're not in the UK, then you might get a different paper size like letter or something else in here. The rastral size is your staff size, so how big you want the staff to be. But I'm going to leave all of these as they are and just press create project. Now, we've asked for no instruments so far. So Dorico says, okay, well, we're going to have to add some, but we start by adding players. So players are the people that you're writing for. So if I do add single player, you can search through the families of instruments, but I wouldn't. I would just start typing. And if I type flute, for example, and then just press enter, then it will create me a flute. So I've now just got one flute in this project. There are some buttons down on the left hand side to create more players. So there's the single players and there's section players. The difference is a single player like the flute, for example, can also double. So if I type piccolo here, then I've got a flute and piccolo player. And to start off with, we're only seeing the flute. If I then say, for example, Shift P to add a new player and type piano, I can add a piano. You can also add section players like strings. So when you write a string violin part, you're actually writing it normally for a desk of violins, unless it's a solo violin. So you can choose from the bottom whether you want solo or section. The next button along is ensembles. I've also added a shortcut for ensembles, so you can do that if you want to, and you can then add an ensemble player. Oops. So if you don't have one already, then you can just click on this little button here, and then you can type, for example, string and choose string section, and it will add all of the string section all at the same time at that point. So that can be another useful option for just quickly adding sections, and you can create your own ensembles. So if you've got a particular ensemble you always write for that you want to put in that ensemble creator and that ensemble builder, then you can do that too. So now what you see here is I've got flute, piano, and the violins, and everybody else down here in the string section. Excuse me. So now, shortcut wise, I'm not going to tell you too many, but just so you understand a couple of what I'm doing. I'm using a Mac today. You can be using a PC as well if you want to. And these buttons across the top that says set up, write, engrave, play, and print are command 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So, or if you're on a PC, it's control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to press command 2 and go to write mode. You can also, by the way, if you're in setup mode or a different mode, if you double click on the score, then you'll get the caret line here. You can see this orange caret line, and that is then used for note input. If it's on, then you're inputting notes. If it's not on, then you're editing notes that are already there. So and you can turn it off again by pressing the enter key. So I can press enter to turn it on and off. I can also press shift N, but that takes more fingers. So I'm just going to use the enter key. You can also, if you've used other notation programs like Sibelius, you might use escape sometimes to turn that off. So you can use enter to turn it on, escape to turn it off, if you so wish. Now, shortcut wise, and you saw I was kind of moving around and various other things, I was using the keyboard to do that. You can use the mouse for various operations as well, but I'll show you a few shortcuts while we're here. So I'm just going to turn off that signpost, and then in this first bar here, I'm moving around by pressing Command or Control and the right arrow key, and that's moving me in various bars. And you can see across the top here we've got a rhythm grid. So this rhythm grid, if I just press the arrow key to the right, is going to move along the rhythm grid, and if I press it to the left, it will move to the left. And this is showing me in 4/4 the strong and the weak beats all as quavers or eighth notes if you're not local. And you can change the rhythm grid here. So if you want semiquavers, 16th notes, then you can do this. If you only want crotchets, you can do this. But our default is this option here, which means that, just like I said, with the right arrow and the left arrow, I can move along in this rhythm grid. So I don't need to necessarily enter rests. You can move to where you want to be in the bar. You can choose your note value. All of these note values here are numbers across the top of the keyboard, where 9 is a big value, and if I move left, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, you see the notes get smaller. So I can choose, for example, a crotchet here, and then I can just press A, B, C, D, E, F, G on my keyboard, and I can enter those notes. Now you see I was choosing here a crotchet, and Dorico has entered a crotchet, or at least a note that's of length crotchet, but that's tied, of course, because of where it existed in the bar. Now if I select all of these notes, I'm going to hold down Shift and select these, and if I wanted to put them in maybe slightly earlier, I can use the Alt or the Option key. Depends on how your keyboard's labelled. Some say Alt, some say Option. If you hold down that key and use the left arrow, I can now move those notes to the left. So now they're all crotchets. If I move them to the right, then they're still crotchets. It just depends where they sit in the bar, which means actually Dorico can be very flexible for composition, because you can decide and change your mind later that you need to move things, change things around, and it's automatically working out, depending on the meter that you're in, which or how that should be notated, what beaming options should be used, what grouping options should be used. You can do it with an individual note. So if I choose an individual note and press Alt right, then it will move that way, Alt left to move it that way. I can also move notes up and down, so I can use Alt up and down to move them that way. There is a shortcut for chromatic if you want it. You can also move notes around if you need to kind of move them with the mouse. So if I grab it with my mouse, I can drag it up and down. You see how a little ghost note here, and then wherever I drop, then that's where it will appear. I can also move them to the left and right, and you can see I've got the rhythm grid again, so it's showing me where they exist to the left and right, and then it's moving those. So, like I said, it's very flexible to be able to move things, change things, and it will regroup automatically. Also, if I take this note, there's a shortcut, and it's on our mouse mat as well, to extend and shorten notes. So extending them, and every time I press the right arrow, it's making it longer along the rhythm grid. So for example, if I was entering piano music, I could press 6 for a crotchet, and I could press a note either on my MIDI keyboard or on just G on my standard computer keyboard. If I double tap 6, so 6 is this shortcut up here for crotchet or quarter note. If I double tap it, then I get dotted notes automatically. So now I've got a dotted note, and as I enter these, Dorico's changing the notation depending on whether or not another note follows it or not, and what the notation should be to be correct in 4/4. So Dorico is doing a lot of that work for you. And if, as I said, if things change, if I select this 4/4, press enter to change it, and type, for example, 6/8, then Dorico will renotate all of this based on the new meter that we're in. If I press undo, then it'll go back to 4/4, and it's rewritten it this way. This is also because when I choose a note here, if I go to the bottom of the screen down here, there's a little arrow at the bottom here. If I choose that one, then I've got various options for the properties panel. I've got a note input option here with a keyboard. There's one for guitar fretboard if we're doing guitar. There's one for drum notation. There's one for the mixer if you want to display it there. And the last one here is our key editor. And in the key editor, you can see that these are all individual notes. So now we're more like being in a sequencer. But you can now drag this note here as well if you want to, and it makes the note longer, or it will make the note shorter, and it's always correcting the notation. If I drag this along here, then it's also correcting the notation here. So you can, if you want to, edit these items effectively as blobs, if you like. They're all still notes. And it will adjust the notation for you if you want it to. But that's why this note here, for example, in Dorico is one note, because it's one note in the key editor, and when the musician plays it, it's one note. So when you enter that, you don't have to enter it as two notes. You don't have to think, I need a quarter note, or I need a crotchet tied to a quaver. You can just think, actually, I need a note that's of this length, and then you can input that, no problem. If you have a MIDI keyboard, then the note input is even quicker. So let's say over here in bar 5, I can turn on the caret line by pressing enter. I can choose my note value, and I can just press notes, including accidentals, of course, on my MIDI keyboard. And Dorico is writing these notes and sometimes changing the accidental based on what else is happening and whether the runs are going up or down and that kind of thing. Also, a MIDI keyboard will make things like chords much, much quicker. If you have a MIDI keyboard, I really recommend using it with Dorico because it really will make things very much quicker for you. There's also things you can do with a MIDI keyboard that you can't do if you're just using the computer keyboard as easily. So for example, in the strings here, if I was to enter some notes for the violin, and now I'm on the violin staff, then I'll get a violin sound for that particular instrument as well. But if I choose the violin staff, I could enter notes for the violin, and I know what some people have done previously is they've said, I've got some chords that I want to enter, and now I want to, let me go back, I'll put this into galley view so we can see what's going on. I now want to kind of, expand these out for all of the other instruments. Well, you can do that in Dorico. There's an option to cut or select these notes, and then you can use an option to, there's a paste special option called explode, and it will explode them out over those instruments if that would work for the way you wanted to do it. There's also a reduce option. If you don't remember where that option is as well, let me just undo that. Then I've selected these notes here. If you press J for the jump bar is a really useful tool because it doesn't matter where the thing is, you can trigger it and do that feature anyway. So when I press J, it says beam together because that's the last thing I did. And Dorico remembers that, which can also be quite useful. But in this case, I just actually want to do explode. So I'll start typing that, and then you can do explode. So now when I press J again, it says explode, because that's the last thing I did, which might be the thing I wanted. So if you don't want to set lots of shortcuts for things, using the jump bar is another way of doing it. And as I said, when we were looking at the key commands earlier, you can set jump bar aliases as well. So you could just say, for example, EX, mine is extend to next note, but yours, if you wanted it to, could be explode if that was a feature you were using. However, when you're doing note input, if I turn on the caret line here and I use the shift key, I can press the arrow key to extend the caret over more notes. Sorry, more notes, over more staves. So now I can enter notes all at the same time for all of these instruments without having to think about, oh, where did I want these to be? So I'll choose a different note value, and if we enter some chords, there we go. So you can enter a 5-note chord on your MIDI keyboard, and it's just putting one note on each staff. If you only did them in unison, so let's do that in unison, then they would all get exactly the same notes. But because I was pressing a 5-note chord, it spread it out. If you press a 4-note chord, it will double up somewhere. If you only do a 6-note chord, somebody would be getting more than one note. You can still edit these. So, for example, my MIDI keyboard that I'm using is a bit short, so these notes probably need to be down an octave. So that's an easy move you can make. The notes here are bright red or dark red, depending on the range. So if these go much higher, then they'll probably become, oh, I forgot double bass. They'll probably become bright red eventually. Double bass range is bigger than I was expecting. There we go. And the dark red notes that you get are if you have notes that are in kind of more in a professional range rather than an intermediary range or a basic range for that instrument. You can tweak all of those as well as an instrument editor. So if you don't agree with our ranges, you can tweak them. The jump bar can also be useful to do things like select some notes, use the jump bar and do things like generate chord symbols. So from the notes that I've got here, you can say, here are the chord symbols based on these chords that I played. If you don't have notes, if I delete the notes and I only have chord symbols in the middle here, then you can also use the jump bar to generate notes from the chord symbols. So then it will rewrite all of the notes in the range of that particular instrument based on the chords that I've written. So you can use that sometimes if you need a quick version, or a quick arrangement, or just a way of exploding out the notes in a different way. That can sometimes be useful. The way chord symbols display, by the way, is completely up to you. So we have lots of options. This is our engraving options dialog here. And in this particular one, there is a chords option for chord diagrams and for chord symbols, chord diagrams being the ones you use on a guitar. And there's all sorts of presets that you can use for how you want chords to display, including Nashville if you want to use numbers. Hi Dave. And if you want to, there's a New York style and there's a jazz standard style and various other ones in here as well. So you can choose those. You can also graphically change these if you want to. So if you want to make a small graphical change to those, all of those engraving type things are all there. When you want to add things like slurs and dynamics, you can choose one or more notes and just press S. But you can move these slurs in the same way that you do notes. So Option was my move key for notes, and it's also working for slurs. And I can extend the slurs in exactly the same way I would have extended notes, and the chord symbols are getting out of the way for me. There are also keys for things like duplicating things to the staff below, so you can add slurs to the staff below. But if you'd selected them all in the first place when you press S, you would have got slurs on all of them. The same kind of thing appears for dynamics. So if I choose some notes here, maybe let's go all the way to the end, I can choose dynamics. Now there are these panels on the right hand side for things, and you say they're just buttons, but when you click on one, you get these panels pop out for clefs, for key signatures, for time signatures, for meters, for various other things that are all in here. And this one includes one for dynamics. So you can choose a dynamic from here if you want to, and it will appear here where I had made the selection at the beginning. But when you want to do something over a range of notes, if you turn this panel off, you can use the Shift D dynamics popover. And this popover lets you type in things like an MP and a hairpin, which is the greater than less than symbol on your keyboard, and an F, so that then over the range of notes you put in, it will put in those dynamics. Now it's doing this and giving me slight collisions only because I'm in galley view and we've just set a default size, and mine obviously isn't quite big enough. If I go back to page view, you can see it's not giving me any collisions. There we go. It's not giving me any collisions. Now also the chord symbols don't normally want to display for the strings. There are options for that so that you don't need to display the chord symbols. You might only want to display them for the piano. By default, Dorico will display chord symbols just for the rhythm instruments, so that'll be fine. But we got this dynamic just for one instrument, but that's not quite what we wanted. We could now copy it to the other instruments, but actually let's just undo that for a second. If we select all of these, then exactly the same way as slurs and various other things we've done, if I do Shift D, let's do a different one this time to prove that it really does work. So you can do P, hairpin, FF. And there are also shortcuts to kind of bump all the dynamics up one. So P becomes MP, FF becomes triple F, or bump them down. So if you need to kind of make changes to those kind of things, you can. Also, these dynamics, even if you drag them with a mouse, they're all linked. So you can see it's dragging to each of the notes and the various positions, but they're doing it for all of them because they were all put in at the same time. If you want to ungroup things, that's no problem. You can do that too. If you are importing music and that kind of sorry, I should say when we're looking at things like popovers that I use for the dynamics, there's all sorts of popovers. But again, the resources page that I showed you at the beginning also has links to various other things, including our help documentation. And the help pages have our popover guide. So you can find popovers for all sorts of things, for entering chord symbols and dynamics and doing transpositions and playing techniques and many of these options down here. So the ornaments panel that we have here, and the playing techniques and the holds and pauses and the lines, there are various options here that you can use, and you can use popovers for, and they really are a quick way of working. So for example, at the beginning here, I can choose an instrument, doesn't really matter which one. If I say I'd like to enter a tempo and I'd like to be something andante moderato will do, and a popover will do that for you. You can also tweak all of these options in the properties panel at the bottom. So if you now want to make a change to this, then you can make those kind of changes as well in the properties panel at the bottom, as well as adjusting the tempos and things. So there's lots of ways you can change things. Popovers are a quick way of entering notes. Now, let me just check where. Yes, so if we want to import some music, now you may have already used another notation program or a DAW being a digital audio workstation, DAW. So Steinberg have one called Cubase. And one of the options you can use from Cubase, well, there's a few options actually. They do have a scoring engine built in. It's not as good as the one in Dorico, but it might get you, some simple parts and things. But when you want to kind of transfer music from Cubase and Dorico into one or the other, then often with the DAW you might use MIDI. So you might save the Cubase project as MIDI. You might save it as music XML, but we'll talk about that in a second. But presuming we're going with MIDI, you can then import things into Dorico if you want to. There's a very clever import system in Dorico to work out what the instrument is, or you can decide what the instrument is, and do you want the parts to be split out or combined automatically as you import them. But there's also a neat option, which is if you're using the key editor down here in Dorico. So let's see, here's the violin part in bar 15. You see as I clicked on the rest there, it jumped to bar 15 down here. So now if I bring up Cubase, I can grab one of these parts here. So let's say we've got some spiccato parts here and a violin legato. That one will do. So I'm going to drag this region out of Cubase and I'm going to drop it down here in Dorico. You see this red line. So when I drop it down here, it imports those notes. Now it's using some basic quantize settings that I've set up, and it looks like they were the wrong ones. So I'm just going to select all of those notes. And let's have all of those actually. And I'm going to use an option called requantize. So you can see here the played durations here. These are the notated durations we're getting at the moment, but the played durations say actually this chord at the beginning shouldn't have been a chord. So I will use requantize, and you can do this at any point. You don't have to do it just after you've imported the music. At any point you can requantize the music and decide, that this is actually what we wanted. You can choose another part. So here's a cello. I think there was a cello bit somewhere. Symphonic strings. Oh, there's a cello part. So let's drag this one as well. So let's bring the cello in there. And again, actually, that might not be the best quantize option. So we'll select all those notes, requantize them. There we go. So when you want to import things from Cubase, you can, if you want to, just import bits and sections as you go. Or in Cubase, you can export everything as a MIDI file and then import that. You can also import and export music XML. So music XML is more of a graphical format. If you're using something like Sibelius or MuseScore or Finale or something like that, then you might want to import music XML. Now, music XML doesn't really look like much to start off with, so it's text really, but it describes things like, instead of a MIDI file just telling you that a MIDI note has a certain velocity for note velocity from the keyboard, then a music XML file will tell you that, for example, there's a dynamic attached to it. Which side of the dynamic, which side of the staff is the dynamic, which side of the stems, that kind of thing. It's much better for tuplets and things. So I took a file earlier, which was one of the, it's a music XML file, which is from the BBC 10 Pieces. So if you have a look on the BBC 10 Pieces website, then you can get some example files from there. And this was one of them. So I just imported it as music XML. Here we go. And this is the end result. So what they were doing here is they've labelled, in fact, we'll go back to the full score for a second. They've labelled lots of instruments, and they've set this up for a school band to play. So they've given you all these instruments, and they have various versions of them. So they've got flutes here, grade 4, 5, and intermediate and beginner, and they've done that for lots of the instruments. They have different options. So in setup mode, you can see all of the music, all of the instruments we've imported, but we don't necessarily want them all on our score. So I made another score, because you can have multiple scores in Dorico, and this score just has only the grade 4 and 5, which means I can now use, again, I can use smaller paper. I could potentially turn on the condensing option as well if I wanted to. If you want to combine some of these instruments like the flutes, it can do that automatically and do the labelling for you as well. But I will turn that off for a second. So I've now got all of the notes. So the advantage of Music XML is that you've got slurs, you've got articulations, you've got dynamics. And that's obviously from a notation program. If you're coming from another one, it's a very good way of importing things. I would say, though, it's not necessarily the best way of learning how to use Dorico, because you've not actually input those, so you don't necessarily know how they work. But it's a good option potentially for when you first want to see how your music would look in Dorico. You can import your music as a music XML file, and all of the programs I think that we've come across will all support exporting music XML. So whether that's Sibelius, Finale, MuseScore, any others, Notion, and they'll all export a music XML file that we can then import. But Dorico gives you a lot more flexibility over how this is going to look in the end and what all of the options are, and being able to then change things later on. Dorico will give you a lot more flexibility, as well as all of the kind of playback and the key editor options as well if you want to tweak things. Also, we have things like our Dorico mixer, and we've also got things like a live stage. So here you can see on the live stage, I've got all of the instruments. Some of them are sat on top of each other at the moment, just because it's an automatic import we've done. But you can move these around. So if you want to move your timpani, and we've got actually all of the grades in here at the moment as well, you can move these around if you want to put them somewhere else. And this is automatically then setting the pan settings and the reverb settings for that particular instrument. So if your piano is actually, or maybe all of the pianos want to be over here, and you want to move all of these violins over a bit, or you want to use these options at the bottom just to kind of bump one person or everybody out a bit to give them all a bit more reverb, you can do. If your Swanee whistle actually wants to be off stage right somewhere, you can drag them over here and it will change the pan settings and the reverb to do that kind of thing. So the live stage is a really useful graphical way of doing that without having to tweak all of the options down here in the mixer, because they're all then done automatically for you. All the sounds are also, of course, loaded automatically for you. So in playback here, it's automatically loading all of the sounds from our sound sources. There's a little E button if you ever do want to come and have a look at what the sounds are and what's been loaded and that kind of thing. And you can tweak lots of the options in here if you want to. But if you've got other playback options you want, there's also a play menu with playback templates. So if you have another library like the BBC SO, from Spitfire, they do a free Discover orchestra. Maybe you use Note Performer with another notation program. Maybe there's another library you want to use, free or otherwise. Playback templates are a good way to go. Again, look at our resources page. Put a link in the chat earlier. And there are playback templates here, and there's playback templates you can download for all sorts of libraries. So instead of going through each instrument and changing all of the sounds for that, you can just go to playback template. You can then load in and choose a different type of orchestra that you already own, and Dorico will automatically load all the sounds for that one for you as well. When you've finished your project, you can go to print, and in the print section, it will kind of prepare things for either your printer or graphics. So it might be, let's use this score with some slightly larger notes on it. You can choose, if it's a printer, if it's being printed, the paper size you want to use, fit to paper, custom size. Do you want duplex printing if you want to print both sides? Those kind of options. There's also graphics options. So if you want to save a PDF, then you can save a PDF. You get a full page preview of all of your layouts here. Let's choose another one. So let's have the clarinets grade 4 and 5. There you go. I haven't actually done any editing of these parts, but that doesn't actually look too bad. I think we could make that fit on less pages, but we could do that as a slight change later on if we need to. So you can now print all of these, or you can export them as graphics, so you can have whichever output option you want. Now, there are 3 versions of Dorico. There's this one, which is Pro, there's an intermediate elements version, and there's a free version, Dorico SE. Even in the free version is limited to the number of players you can write for. So you can only write for 8 players. This score, obviously, far too big. But you could send this project to somebody who has Dorico SE, and they could open this project, and they will be able to play it, and they will be able to print their part, or any of the parts if you wanted to. They just can't edit it in the free version because there are too many players. But you can just send them one Dorico file. So instead of having to print out their own parts or send them a particular PDF of their parts, you can just send them one Dorico file. They could open it in Dorico SE, which is the free version they can get from our website, and they could then play it, which can be really useful because they can use the mixer and adjust the balance of things if they want to. And they can print their own parts from it. And if they then want to write any of their own music, then Dorico SE could be very useful for them for that too. There's also an iPad version of Dorico, and that works in the same way. So if you go to the App Store on your iPad and you look for Dorico, you can download a free version, and initially you can only write for a limited number of players. But this same Dorico file, same file format, so if you could put it in Dropbox or anything else, or email it to them or whatever, they could open that on their iPad if they wanted to, and they can use that as a sheet music reader. So it has a sheet music reader function built in even in the free version, so they can use that for turning pages. They can use an Apple Pencil and annotate things if they wanted to, all of those kind of things. And it means that you don't have to have sent them a PDF of exactly the right thing, and that kind of thing. And they can even play it on the iPad version as well if they wanted to, if they want to see how it sounds. So it's the same file format for whether it's Mac or PC or iPad. It really doesn't matter. And sometimes just sending a Dorico file can be really useful. But of course, there are the print options, because really, in the end, you want to be able to print the music from Dorico, because that's really the purpose. All of the playback things are lovely, but our main focus is, of course, engraving. That's why there's a dedicated engrave mode as well. So in the engrave mode, instead of it moving slurs between particular notes, this is where you get the fine control over all of these items and exactly where they're positioned. Excuse me. So if you need to make graphical changes to things in engrave mode, that's the kind of things you can do, as well as all the page templates. So that's really what Dorico is set up to do. It's the engraving side of things. From there, which is why that bit's so important to us. Right, let me just check. I think we might have some questions and things from people. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and then check with Ruth. Are there any questions and things that that you want me to come up? I think there's only one in the Q&A section. Do you want me to take that one first?
Yes, so we've had a few questions submitted, some in advance and some live. So thank you for your questions, and please do continue submitting those in the Q&A function, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. So Paul asked, what are the best, easiest ways to correctly place and move notation about in the engrave panel?
Right, so in engrave mode here, the notes themselves, the idea is that you don't move them in engrave mode unless you needed to make particular publishing changes, if you like, to those kind of things. So the shortcuts that you normally use for moving notes around won't really apply. And they, like I said, what they do for things like slurs, because you want to graphically change a slur and you can move the ends of them. Often people do use a mouse for these, but the same shortcuts you were using, so Alt and the arrow keys will move this around, and Alt and Command, or Option and Control, will then move these in bigger jumps. So if you need to move things around with a keyboard, you can do that as well. There are options for the notation. So, for example, there is a staff spacing option here, where in engrave mode you can move these staff spacing options around if you want to, and Dorico will highlight in red anything you've changed, so you can press delete and put it back if you've made any mistakes. There's also an option for notation. Now this looks slightly scary. I'll explain what's going on. these are all of the individual beats, and there is a lot of them in this bar, because even in 2/4 we've been writing semiquavers. But you can adjust with Option again, or with Command and Option. You can adjust and move an individual beat, or you can move an individual note in here. And you can either click on these options with your mouse, or you can press Tab and move between those with a keyboard. So you can, if you want to, make these changes. But the really useful thing is that when you go out of this mode and then go, oh, hang on, there's a slight problem here, you can come back in and see where the changes are. Just press delete and it'll put it back where it should be. So, sorry, excuse me. So I think hopefully that's the kind of notation things they want to change. But if not, get in touch with me and we can talk in more detail about what they need.
Great. Thank you very much, John. We also had a question from Deborah who asked, can you talk about creating custom playback techniques?
Oh, now there's a topic. Now, Deborah, I think from your name, you might already have my email address. So this might be something we want to cover in a bit more detail somewhere else. What we're talking about is playing techniques are these kind of things. So pizzicato, vibrato, or if it's particular techniques like slap tongue for winds, or strings, or anything else. But in these particular things here, what they often do is attach to something for playback. So when you write, is there any down here? Oh, there is one. There's a coincidence. So there's pizzicato here. So this, of course, is going to change the sound of the cellos. So not only do you want to create a playing technique over here, so there's a little add to create a new one, and there's a little pencil tool. And then if I look in the string section, here's pits already. But I could add or I could edit the pits down here. And this text, in this particular case, some of them are little icons for things, is also attached to a playback technique of pizzicato, so that it will mean that whichever library you use for playback, it will also change the sound of this. So these strings here will sound pizzicato, whereas the other ones will be sounding normal, legato, arco, depending on how you want to describe it. So the quick gist is you can press this little plus button, you can add your own technique. So we're going to create a technique called Bob, and you can then assign it for playback. But I think from your question, you might also then want to assign it to how you want it to work in the playback template and that kind of thing. And that's a slightly bigger thing. Basically, it all comes down to a menu about what you want this pizzicato to do, and that depends on the library you're using and how you want to save it. So in most cases, most people don't need to worry about this because they get mapped automatically. But if you want to create your own particular techniques and that kind of thing, then email me and we can just talk about that. There are a couple of videos that we've done on our YouTube channel about creating and sharing playback templates, which will include this kind of thing. But if you need anything else, then you can email me. Do you want me to put my email in the chat, or is it being shared anyway?
Yeah, that would be great if you can.
Yes, I'll put it in there now. And then if there's any
people have
questions,
yeah,
or afterwards, if you've got any questions, then you can email me. If you suddenly think of something, oh, I forgot to ask, then my email address is in the chat if you want to ask that one.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. That's really helpful. We also had a question from David who asked, will import work from other DAWs like GarageBand?
Oh, hello, David. Yes, I know David. I saw him last weekend, actually. Yes, it will. So it really doesn't matter. If you're doing a MIDI import or a Music XML import, we don't mind where it came from. We don't hold it against you for using something else. It's fine. So no, you can import from anything you like. Again, there is actually a sessions particularly on MIDI import, and there's one called I think something like From Score to Door, because we took it from from door to score, probably be the other way around, so that we took it from a particular door and looked at the MIDI import options in Dorico and how you can use all of those. But yes, it doesn't matter where the file came from, you can import that. Probably from GarageBand I'd use MIDI, so do a MIDI import, but otherwise, yes, if it was from something else, you can do XML and from Sibelius, for example. But yes, yeah, no problem, doesn't matter where it came from.
Great, thanks. Kinga's just asked, is there a way to put anything into brackets, like trill markings, for example, for editorial suggestions?
Yes, Yes, some of them already exist. So some of the editorial things you'll sometimes do are things like for slur options. So you've got solid options and dashed sometimes they are, or dotted, or there's an editorial one which is a line through it as well to show. So some items already have something which has an editorial option for it. Some of them don't. So for example, you just mentioned trills. So they exist over here, or you can do it in the ornaments popover and just put TR. And then it depends whether it has a length or not and whether it has a line. And some of these you can, and some of them you can't necessarily. You can make your own. But for lots of these kind of things, it's also, if you need to, you can also make them as playing techniques, which then have brackets around them. So I'd say, depending on what they are, in particular, trills doesn't have an option for editorial. But if it did, then it would be down here somewhere, so you would be able to see what some of the options are, and often add things down here. So things like sometimes for dynamics and that kind of thing, sometimes people have done them this way with prefix and suffix. And sometimes you may need to adjust the sizes and things depending on where you want them to be. Sometimes people will make them as playing techniques, so you can make one of these, which then has brackets and things with them. So if you wanted this pits, for example, and we wanted to edit this one, then you can add them. If they don't already exist, then you can add them in here as well. So it may depend on the exact editorial option that you wanted. Oops, I've just tried to add that for. That won't work, by the way, for flutes. They won't like playing pits. But yes, there are options either in the properties panel or by editing those. And like I said, you can make your own if you need to. If you need to make your own of those. But if there's a particular one you don't have, let me know. I know there was a particular complicated one the other day of a hairpin which needed to have brackets around it. If you need that kind of thing, email me and I'll tell you how we did that.
Okay, great, thank you. Could you tell us a bit about the differences between Dorico and Sibelius? That's maybe quite a big question, but if you could summarise.
I think we said at the beginning, I used to work at Sibelius, and actually the team that make this program, we all used to work at Sibelius. The differences really are that when Sibelius was designed, it was designed as kind of a musical typewriter. So you probably started out with some idea of what you already wanted at the beginning on manuscript paper. In fact, while I'm not showing anything on my screen, I should stop sharing. Otherwise, I'm waving my arms around and you're not seeing me at all. So it was kind of designed as a musical typewriter. The idea was you had an idea of what you wanted onto manuscript paper, and then you were writing it out on a computer. With Dorico, people tend to treat it more like a word processor. So when you're starting a letter these days, you don't think, oh, I'm starting a letter. You just start writing, and then you want to format it and change it to add the address and anything else that you want to do. So you need to be able to change things more flexibly, and that's what we created Dorico to do. So Dorico was created from the ground up as kind of clean slate. We didn't take any of the it must do this in this way because that's the way Sibelius does it or anything else. We just said, here's, in the 21st century, this is what we know people want to be able to create. And we took lots of input from people as the kind of things they wanted to be able to do, the kind of things that a computer should be able to speed up for you these days. So we don't rely on plugins to do things. Engrave mode, for example, doesn't really exist in Sibelius because that concept doesn't exist. The way we do instrument changes so that you can just write for those instruments as a composer, and Dorico will automatically sort out where the instrument changes should happen and the transpositions. That's automatic. The condensing feature and the divisi feature I showed you at the beginning, they don't exist in Sibelius. There isn't an option with one button to say condense this score and make a short score. And there's also sessions we've done showing things like when you're doing drum notation and drum input. I was contacted by somebody who uses Sibelius a lot and trains people how to use it and is starting to use Dorico more. And they said, I'm just quicker still on Sibelius at doing things like drum input. Here are the plugins I use. Here's how we do it. So I did a video saying, here's this same piece in Dorico and how you can quickly use just the native functions in Dorico to create exactly that same drum part, and it's a lot quicker. So there are features that exist in Dorico that don't exist in Sibelius. I think it's more flexible and quicker to be able to do them. However, if you've already used Sibelius, there's no real advantage to already having learnt Sibelius to then use Dorico. The shortcuts are often different. Occasionally they're the same, but they're often different in the way we do things. So if you try and use one program the same way as another program, you'll get frustrated because they work in a slightly different way, even though the end result is still sheet music. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. Cheers. We've had a question from Martin who asked, does Dorico contain graphics which are available to insert alongside specific performance instructions on blank pages preceding the score?
Okay. In some cases, yes, or you can import graphics. So you can either, in fact, let me just grab the screen sharing thing back, which is in the window that's made itself smaller and the buttons disappeared. There it is. So in engrave mode, you have all these page options down here on the right hand side. And you can do things like create pages and all sorts of things over here. So if you needed to create a blank page, for example, you can do this. You can insert a page, say before page 1, I need to put in a blank page. So you can make title pages. All of these are actually designed around templates. So there's a template system down here. So if you've designed a template once, you don't have to do it again. You can just import it. Over here, there are frames then that you can use for music frames, text or graphics. So you could drag out a graphics frame and import a graphic. Also, you can use the playing techniques options that we use. So when we talked about pizzicato and various other things there, you can use those as well if you want to. So all of these options here, when you create one and you change this to say it's a glyph, you can also import graphics into here. So if you've got a playing technique you want to use, that doesn't exist in Dorico natively, you can create that from a graphic as well, and you can then put it on your title page to explain what that graphic is so that when you use it in the score and those kind of things. So yes, basically engrave mode gives you all of those desktop publishing options that you need to do all of those kind of graphic type things, and what I'm doing here isn't affecting the parts. So if you need to put it in one particular part, like the percussion part, to explain something, you can, but it doesn't need to be in everybody else's. So yes, it's very flexible to do those kind of things.
Great, thank you. And is Dorico good for beginners, or would you say it's more aimed at advanced composers? I know you mentioned different levels of Dorico.
Yes, I mean, it's designed to be really flexible and useful even for beginners, and we use it a lot with students in schools who get to grips with it really quickly, because when people say, is it intuitive, well, what they really mean is it quick to learn. If a student who's never used any notation before, or if you've never used the notation program, it's a really intuitive, quick program to use. But like I said at the beginning, we also have all of these resources to help you, so you're not just left to your own devices. You can use these getting started resources, the quick first steps, and you can also just Google, how do I do dynamics in Dorico? And our little videos and things will come up to tell you how to do those. But once you've learned how to do one particular thing, it's very intuitive that will also work in a similar way somewhere else. So that can be really useful. But you don't just have to use Dorico Pro for all of that. As I said, there's also Dorico SE, which is free. You can download that today from the website, dorico.com. And you can get started with that one right for up to 8 instruments, which is for a lot of people is more than enough. And it's a very flexible program and free to be able to use. It's, I think, definitely the most flexible composition program, certainly for free, that's available. So even for beginners, yes, I think that isn't a problem. The intermediate version is also useful because it's an unlimited number of players, but for people who don't need all of the massive publishing options that we've been looking at as well, they just want to write for more players. Dorico SE is really useful, and also, sorry, Dorico Elements is really useful, and Dorico Elements also comes with an extra sample library because to make the sounds even better in that middle version. And then there's a Pro version. Even in the Pro version, actually, if you already have Finale or Sibelius, we do a cross-grade deal, so you can get a 50% discount because you've already spent something on notation. So it's if you're looking at the website and think, oh, even the Pro version's expensive, there are really useful discounts on those as well. But no, is it good for beginners? Absolutely. It's because when you're trying to do composition and that kind of thing, it really is the most useful program. And like I said, for a beginner, you can get in touch with us, with me, with people on the forum, with people on Facebook. If you have a question, there's a really good community of people who can help you out with those kind of things.
Great, thank you. And I believe there's a discount on Dorico for schools, is that correct?
Yes, there is. So if you're also a student, then there's a further discount as well. So in fact, if you're doing the student version for Pro and the cross-grade, you get a double discount. But yes, for all the versions, well, apart from the free version, but yes, for all the versions, yes, that's not a problem. There's a student discount, and that's also available on the website, or just you can email me and ask me if you want any details on that. But and for schools in particular, there's also a site license. So if they're kitting out a lab, for example, of 5 or more computers, there's a very discounted price to do that, because it's just one site with multiple copies on it, and we do a multi-seat option for that one too. Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm afraid we've run out of time, so it
Okay.
just remains for me to say thank you very much, John, for that extremely useful overview of arranging and composing in Dorico 5. And thank you to everyone for joining us. I hope you found the session informative and useful. And if you have any further questions, please do feel free to email John, or indeed email us at the ISM Trust on inquiries@ismtrust.org. And please also fill in our post-webinar survey, which you can find in the chat, and it will also be emailed out to you. We really appreciate your feedback, and it helps us to improve our services and offer more free professional development in the future. And as we said, today's webinar recording will be sent to you by email, and it will also be available to watch back on our website. And we'll send you some useful links as well, which we've shared during the webinar. And if you'd like to join us for another ISM Trust event, our next one is a Healthy Instrumentalists webinar on the 2nd of October, which will be about physical health problems for instrumentalists, including prevention and support. So do sign up for that if you're interested. And finally, can I just thank you again for watching, and we hope to see you at another ISM event soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.